Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. After the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You stand in the ashes of District 12. Charred foundations, twisted metal, a few stubborn chimneys stabbing up through the smoke. Now pull the camera back. On the horizon, there's another district. No fire, no bodies, just an empty, radioactive skyline the capital swears was destroyed decades ago. District 13. So here's the real question. Between the smoldering ruins of 12 and the ghost city of 13, which one did President Snow actually hate more? At face value, the easy answer is that it doesn't matter. Snow is the villain of Panem. He hates all the districts. The games punish everyone, every year, without fail. If you grow up under Snow, your district number doesn't save you from the reaping. So, does it even make sense to talk about a most hated district when every child is potential cannon fire? But that part matters because we're not just talking about suffering in raw numbers. We're talking about obsession. Which district lived rent-free in Snow's head? Which place shaped his decisions, warped the rules of the games, and quietly helped bring his whole system down? This is where we talk about contradiction. On paper, District 12 is useless to the capital. It's the poorest district, shoved out at the edge of Panem, barely producing enough coal to be worth the trains. Its victors are rare, its tributes are underfed, and volunteering is basically a myth. If you're Snow, this should be the district you forget exists. Instead, 12 gives you the girl on fire. It produces Katniss Everdeen and Peter Mellark, the victors whose Nightlock stunt publicly humiliates Snow on his own broadcast. The district that doesn't matter suddenly becomes ground zero for rebellion, a symbol of hope for every other district watching the games. Why is the least important place the one that sets the capital's carefully scripted story on fire? Now look back at 13. Officially, it's gone, wiped out in the dark days as a warning. Its ruined skyline is part of the capital's promise. Rebel, and this is what happens to your home. But underground, District 13 is alive, organized, and negotiating a secret non-aggression deal with the capital. Snow has to rule a Panem where one of the original districts is both dead on paper and dangerously real in practice. So, which one keeps him up at night? The district he failed to erase, or the district he pretends he already did? There is a lot to uncover here, because Snow's hatred isn't just personal, it's strategic. His grudges against 12 and 13 don't stay in his head. They rewire the Hunger Games themselves, from how arenas are designed, to which victors get targeted, to why a quarter quell suddenly drags old winners back into the nightmare. By the end of this video, we're going to cover how those grudges turn into firebombs, mutts, and rule changes and how the districts Snow tried hardest to erase are exactly the ones that erase him instead. N. Did all districts really suffer equally? So, when we say Snow's grudges turn into firebombs and rule changes, that raises a bigger problem. Were those weapons aimed at everyone equally? Or were some districts always standing closer to the barrel? At face value, the capital wants you to think the answer is simple. 12 interchangeable districts. 12 interchangeable rebels in waiting. The games hit everyone, the same 2 names, the same odds. The official message is suffer together, submit together. But you don't have to look far before that illusion cracks. District 1 is grooming career tributes in gyms with full bellies and polished weapons. District 12 is trading squirrel meat for stale bread and wondering if they'll survive winter. Never mind the arena. So why is one district's child basically a sponsored gladiator, while another's is a walking corpse before the train even leaves? Why does Snow tolerate a culture of volunteering in 1, 2, and 4, but in places like 11 or 12, a kid stepping forward earns a public beating? Why does he bomb 12 off the map, but not 2, whose peacekeepers literally enforce his will? Why does 13 get erased from history instead of being paraded as a smoking crater to scare everyone else? Here's the real question. If the punishment were truly equal, why does the map of Panem end up looking like his mood board for personal grudges? This is where we talk about how the games are sold as the one thin promise of escape. You win, you become a victor, and supposedly you outrun hunger, whippings, and the reaping forever. That part matters because it's the carrot he dangles in front of the poorest districts. Endure enough pain, and maybe one child will buy you a year of extra grain. But even that promise isn't the same everywhere. A victory from District 1 or 2 reinforces the capital's fantasy: loyal, glamorous killers, proving the system works. A victory from 11 or 8 or especially 12, that's a question mark. That's a reminder that the most desperate places can still produce symbols he can't fully script. You see it with Katniss and Peter. Their win doesn't just embarrass Snow. It comes from the coal dust he already associates with instability, with the kind of quiet resistance that doesn't stay quiet forever. A rebellious victor from a distrusted district is more dangerous than 10 obedient careers, because they threaten his relationship with fear itself. And that's where the hatred stops being purely political. Snow's rise, his early brush with real rebellion, his obsession with image and control, those experiences teach him to sort districts into categories in his head: useful, controllable, symbolic threats. Some he starves, some he militarizes, some he pretends don't exist at all. There is a lot to uncover here. So next we're going to cover how that mental map evolves, from the first arenas to the lost District 13, to the moment he decides District 12 isn't worth managing anymore and orders it burned. Because once you trace that timeline, one district stands out as the one he wanted not just broken, but erased. And the twist is, that decision is exactly what starts to erase him instead. Snow's grudge map, our core question. So when you zoom out on that timeline, something jumps out immediately. Snow doesn't treat Panem as 12 equal problems. He treats it as a grudge map. Some districts are tools. District 1 and 2 get better food, better housing, the promise of glory in the games. They're trained into becoming the capital's attack dogs, and in return, they get to pretend they're almost capital themselves. Other districts are just factories, 4 for fish, 7 for lumber, 10 for livestock, replaceable, manageable. As long as the quotas get met, Snow barely has to think about them. But here's the real question. Which districts live rent-free in Snow's head? Because that part matters, because we're not just ranking suffering or counting whippings in the square. We're tracking where he spends his energy. Bombings, propaganda, rigged arenas, targeted brutality. When you follow the trail of overreaction, you start to see which places he considers existential threats instead of background noise. This is where we talk about Snow as more than a dictator. We're going to cover him almost as a game designer and political strategist, whose fears are hard-coded into the rules. At face value, the Hunger Games are about punishing all the districts equally. 2 tributes each, 1 victor, 1 bloody reminder of who's in charge. But look closer. Certain districts get good arenas, favorable sponsors, careers who mysteriously survive longer. Others get freezing forests, poisonous fog, mutts that seem awfully tailored to break a specific person on a specific year. That's not random. That's a man editing patch notes on reality. On that grudge map, 2 districts sit at the center of the board, 12 and 13. District 13 is the ghost, the one the capital claims it erased. Officially, it's a smoking crater. In reality, it negotiated a secret deal and survived underground, which means Snow's entire narrative of total control is built on a lie he has to maintain every single day. Every game's broadcast, every mention of the Dark Days, is also a cover-up operation for 13's continued existence. Then there's District 12, the district that's supposed to be harmless, poor, politically irrelevant. And yet, it produces Katniss and Peter, the victors whose Nightlock stunt humiliates Snow on live television and turns the games into open defiance. Suddenly, 12 isn't just a coal mine. It's a symbol. It's proof that a starving district can embarrass the capital with nothing but berries and a relationship the cameras can't quite control. So which one does he hate more? The ghost that proves he never had full power, or the ember that catches fire on screen? There is a lot to uncover here. The quiet non-aggression deal with 13, the way certain arenas feel rigged against tributes from 12, why Katniss's survival from that forgotten district is uniquely threatening, and how his eventual decision to burn 12 to ash is the move that finally exposes 13 to the world. Next, we're going to cover those pressure points one by one and watch how every attempt to crush these districts only deepens the cracks in the capital's control. Where we're going, from ruins to rebellion. So, where are we actually going with all of this? You've got Snow burning 12, dreading 13, and turning the games into a pressure cooker. But here's the real question. How do we sort personal grudge from political strategy and figure out which district he truly could not stand? To answer that, we have to rewind. Before Roses, before the perfectly curated president, there's young Coriolanus in the post-10th Hunger Games era, clinging to status while the capital is still half in ruins. In the first act, we're going to cover how those early years of scarcity, rebellion, and humiliation trained him to see certain districts not just as enemies, but as reminders of his own weakness. Why does a boy who almost starved end up obsessed with controlling coal, grain, and weapons? Why does one failed romance in 12 echo through every later decision about that district? That part matters because it turns abstract order into very specific grudges. From there, we move into the machinery of punishment. This is where we talk about the games as a customized weapon. Not every district gets the same treatment, and Snow knows it. We're going to cover how he tailors peacekeeper brutality, starvation, and spectacle depending on who he's trying to break. Why does 11 get public whippings and food riots, while 2 gets career academies and prestige? Why does 12 swing between neglect and annihilation? And why is 13 the ghost he keeps trying not to say out loud? In the middle sections, we'll slow down with 2 case studies. First, District 12, the forgotten coal district that somehow produces the Mockingjay and the boy with the bread. We'll trace how the 74th and 75th games are quietly rigged to either absorb or destroy that defiance, from the Nightlock berries to the Quarter Quell twist. Then District 13, officially erased, unofficially bargaining with the capital, and constantly threatening Snow's image that the rebellion was crushed. At face value, one is weak and poor, the other is militarized and stubborn. The reason their relationship to Snow is so different tells us a lot about what he actually fears. Then we'll zoom out and get meta for a second, because the books and the movies don't torture these districts in quite the same way. We'll compare how 12's starvation, whippings, and bombed-out ruins are framed on the page versus on screen, and how 13's underground austerity sometimes reads as noble, sometimes as harsh. Why does film Katniss's 12 feel almost picturesque until it burns, while Book 12 feels doomed from page 1? There is a lot to uncover here about how adaptation shifts our sense of which district feels most hated, and how that nudges your emotional verdict. Near the end, we're going speculative. If Snow had a private grudge list on his desk, how would he rank the districts? Is 13 at the top because of military threat? Or does 12 outrank it because it humiliates him in front of the whole nation? Where do 11 and 2 land with their rebellions and loyalties? We'll imagine how he scores them on threat level, symbolism, and humiliation factor, and what that ranking quietly reveals about his own insecurities. Finally, we'll pull it all together. We'll answer the central question, which district did Snow hate the most? And then push one step further. Why does his answer matter for the franchise's core theme of hope versus fear? And what if one detail had changed? A different victor, a different arena, a different bombing order. We'll end on a curveball what if that tests whether Snow's hatred was inevitable. Or if Panem could have produced a very different enemy. If you're new to Panem. So if we're going to test whether Snow's hatred was inevitable, here's the real question. Who are we exactly to be poking at his grudges this hard? If you stumbled in here from a movie clip or a TikTok edit of Katniss spinning in that wedding dress, quick orientation. This channel basically lives in the deep end of Hunger Games lore. We're going to cover the parts the films skim over. The paperwork, the power plays, the districts that keep Snow up at night when the roses stop working. At face value, it sounds simple. Evil president, oppressed districts, brutal games. But this is where we talk about why Panem's systems are built the way they are. District 12's bombing isn't just revenge. District 13's extinction isn't just a plot twist. There is a lot to uncover here about how one man turns geography, history, and children into tools. If you've been around the channel for a while, you already know the pattern. We zoom in on one piece of the world, the victor's village, the quarter quell card, one obscure line in Snow's speech, and pull until the whole political machine starts showing. The promise here is the same. We'll stay fast-paced and story-driven. No dry civics lecture, even when we're diagramming the relationship between a coal district and a bouquet of genetically engineered roses. For anyone new, think of this as Victor's Village-style analysis. On the surface, it's cozy. We walk you through districts, games design, Snow's regime, rebel strategy. Underneath every detail is a pressure point. Why does volunteering explode in the career districts, but not in 12? Why does Snow tolerate 2's armed power, but panic over 13's hidden cameras? Why does one starving girl with a bow threaten him more than an entire armory carved into a mountain? If that's the kind of deep dive that makes you reread a chapter or rewatch a scene with fresh dread, you're in the right place. You can hang out for this video or join the wider community of people who care way too much about which peacekeeper unit got reassigned after the bread riots and which Victor's interview broke Capitol propaganda for a week. The promise is more district-by-district dissections, more "wait, that part matters because" moments. Quick pattern interrupt before we dive back in. Snow's worst nightmare wasn't Katniss. It was the place that could create her twice. From here on, treat the rest of the video as a guided tour through Snow's grudges. We'll start with his origin story in the early Capitol, when District 13 wasn't a ghost yet, and the games were still stabilizing his power. Then we'll track the first district that ever truly scared him, how that fear mutates into hatred, and why every arena after that quietly points back to the same spot on the map. Snow before the roses, a young president in a fragile Panem. We ended with a map. Now we need a clock, because to understand which district Snow hates the most, you have to catch him before the white roses, before the poison, when he's still just Coriolanus in an unstable capital that smells more of smoke than perfume. We're talking post-Dark Days, post-10th Hunger Games, when the arenas are basically murder warehouses and the broadcasts are closer to war reports than entertainment. Back then, the games are a patch, not a polished product. The capital is hungry, the districts are angrier than they are afraid, and the promise of peace is held together with barbed wire and mass graves. This is where we talk about Snow climbing. He's young, ambitious, and he has already watched the capital almost lose everything. District 13 hasn't become a ghost story yet. It's a fresh crater on the horizon. The official story says 13 was obliterated for treason. The unofficial reality Snow learns early on. The capital didn't finish the job. They negotiated. They blinked. That part matters because it brands his brain. If the capital can be forced into a secret deal once, what's stopping another district from trying again? Here's the real question. When you grow up in a regime that almost died, do you ever see defiance as small, or does every spark look like the first flame of a second war? In those early decades, the districts aren't fully broken. You still have miners in 12 muttering about the dark days, farmers in 11 remembering executions in the fields, and career districts in 1 and 2 whose loyalty is based more on privilege than principle. Peacekeepers are stretched thin. Transport lines are fragile. The memory of air raids and mushroom clouds is recent enough that people can point to the exact hill where their world changed. So when Snow rises into the presidency, he's not a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. He's an anxious survivor with power. To him, the games are not just punishment, they're stitches in a torn country. Any crack in that system, a rebellious district, a victor who doesn't play along, a crowd that cheers at the wrong moment, feels like the first tremor before total collapse. At face value, his hatred of certain districts looks petty. Why obsess over Backwater 12? Why keep 13 in the propaganda reel for decades after its destruction? The reason is humiliation. 13 is the original wound, the district that proved the capital could be forced into compromise, then buried the evidence underground. 12 will become the echo of that trauma, the place whose coal, whose starving children, and eventually whose mockingjay refused to stay in their assigned narrative. We're going to cover how those 2 districts split his fear in half, one past, one future. But first, we need to see the exact moment Snow realizes the war never actually ended. District 13, the ghost that wouldn't die. That war never actually ended line. District 13 is the proof Snow spends his entire career trying not to think about. On paper, the story is simple. The capital crushed the dark days, obliterated District 13 in a single decisive strike, and left its ruins smoking on the horizon as a permanent warning. You disobey, you disappear. At face value, that's a clean narrative. One rebel district, one overwhelming response, and then 75 years of obedient silence. But here's the real question. If 13 was really gone, why keep showing its ashes on television? Why keep pointing at a grave that supposedly has no ghosts left in it? Because the official story is a performance. The truth is much messier and much more dangerous to Snow. District 13 didn't die. It went underground. Literally, it leveraged its nuclear program, forced the capital to the table, and negotiated a secret, non-aggression pact. In exchange for staying out of the games and off the map, it would keep its missiles pointed away from the capital's glittering skyline. There is a lot to uncover here. Snow's entire political inheritance rests on this arrangement. The capital's great victory, the foundational myth that justifies every whipping post and every peacekeeper, is built on a lie. The war didn't end in total domination. It ended in compromise. That part matters because his whole relationship to the other districts is based on the promise that resistance is pointless. You can't beat the capital. You can only die trying. But 13 did beat them in the one arena Snow cares about most, image. It's the one district that forced the capital to blink first. And once you know that, all those propaganda shots of destroyed 13 start to look desperate, right? The capital has to keep insisting it won precisely because, in this one case, it didn't. So, why does this terrify Snow personally? Because it exposes the soft underbelly of his power. If 13 could hold the capital hostage with nukes, What else could work? Unified boycotts of the games? Coordinated sabotage of shipments? The existence of 13 proves the capital is not a god. It's a government that can be pressured. This is where we talk about hatred. Snow doesn't just see 13 as rebellious. He sees it as the original insult. Every time he signs an order for a public execution in another district, he's overcompensating for the one place he couldn't break. 13 is the permanent reminder that the capital can be forced to bargain, so everywhere else has to suffer extra to make up the difference. That's why his obsession with information control is so intense. Why is he so furious when 13 reappears on air, when Katniss's propose show their bunkers, their soldiers, their president? Because the second the average citizen sees 13 breathing, the spell breaks. The games stop being an unchallengeable tradition and start looking like a very fragile performance. And once you realize Snow's empire is built on pretending 13 is dead, you can probably guess what happens when another district starts to feel undead too. We're going to cover how 12 slowly turns into his second ghost, this time on live television. From blunt terror to elegant torture, evolving the games. So if District 12 is turning into Snow's second ghost, the next question is, why doesn't he just wipe it out the way he did 13? Why keep the games at all when you could just bomb a district and be done? At face value, the Hunger Games start as that blunt solution. Early on, they're not the polished spectacle you see with Katniss. They're messy, crude arenas that are basically open killing fields, no carefully themed environments, no sponsors turning death into a shopping experience. You're watching mass executions with better lighting. The capital still gets its blood, but there is a lot to uncover here about why that wasn't enough for Snow. Because here's the real question. If you can destroy a district, why bother with this yearly ritual? The reason is 13. Blowing 13 off the map doesn't erase it. It turns it into a rumor with teeth. Every missing cousin, every unexplained freight shipment, every glitch in the story becomes proof that the capital is lying. Pure terror makes martyrs, and martyrs don't stay buried, so Snow refines the games from punishment into performance. This is where we talk about control through repetition. A single bombing is shocking, but it's over. The games are annual, predictable, televised. They keep the capital entertained, the districts terrified, and they give Snow a flexible tool. He can dial the cruelty up or down depending on which district he wants to send a message to that year. You start to see this in how specific arenas function. A water-heavy arena when he wants to drown a fishing district's pride. A forest set on fire when he wants to remind coal miners what happens when fuel burns out of control. Mutts that echo fallen tributes features, so any whisper of heroism is literally turned into a monster. That part matters because it's not just random sadism. It's targeted humiliation, and the rewards are just as engineered. Career districts rack up victors, parades, training centers. They get the promise that if they play along, their children are statistically safer. Districts on Snow's bad side get unlucky draws, hostile terrain, rule tweaks that always seem to cut against them. You're not watching equal suffering. You're watching a rigged relationship chart between Snow and each district. Over time, the games become his answer to the 13 problem. Instead of one big act of annihilation that creates legends, he uses controlled, ritualized terror to bleed potential legends out on camera. Any spark of rebellion is pre-packaged as entertainment for the capital, then buried under commentary, betting odds, and fashion analysis. So, if the arena is Snow's main instrument, who does he aim it at most aggressively? Which district keeps getting scripted for tragedy instead of triumph? We're going to cover how that pattern points straight at the place he fears almost as much as 13, and why its children keep refusing to die on cue. Why even allow volunteers? Snow's dangerous little loophole. So, if the arena is Snow's main instrument, and certain districts keep getting cast as cannon fodder, here's the real question. Why give any of them a say in who walks in to die? On paper, volunteering looks generous. A sibling can step in. A trained fighter can save a weaker kid. At face value, you could almost mistake it for mercy. But this is where we talk about design. Volunteering isn't a glitch in Snow's punishment system. It's the feature that makes the whole thing self-sustaining. Think about districts 1, 2, and 4. The so-called career districts don't just tolerate the games. Whole families build their lives around them. Children train from the time they can walk, waiting for the moment they're finally old enough to shout, "I volunteer." That isn't rebellion. That's a pipeline, a steady stream of tributes who arrive pre-motivated, preconditioned, and proud to be there. So why even allow volunteers? Why not just rip 2 random names every year and be done with it? Because Snow understands something basic about power. Terror alone is expensive. You need constant force, constant peacekeepers, constant crackdowns. But if you add a tiny sliver of promise, a house in Victor's village, food for your district, your face on capital screens, you get people to do the work for you. There is a lot to uncover here about that relationship between fear and hope. A system that offers a microscopic chance at glory is more stable than one built on pure dread. Parents in career districts push their children to train. Mentors groom new volunteers. Neighbors whisper that maybe this year will be their turn to win. No one has to force them into the arena. They walk in smiling because the alternative, staying poor and invisible, feels worse. That part matters because it doesn't just divide capital and district. It divides district against district. When 1 and 2 treat the games as a career path, what does that do to a place like 12, where volunteering is basically unheard of? It makes fear look like weakness. It lets Snow point and say, "See, some of you are worthy competitors. Some of you are just coal dust." He doesn't have to crush unity from the outside. He lets aspiration corrode it from within. Here's the pattern interrupt, that same little loophole, the door labeled volunteer that was supposed to funnel eager children from the right districts, ends up opening for the wrong tribute. A girl from the district that was never meant to produce a threat steps through it, not because she dreams of Victor's village, but because she refuses to let her sister die. Snow wanted volunteers who loved the games. Instead, he gets one who learns how to weaponize the hope he's been selling back to the capital. And District 12 is about to turn his favorite control mechanism into his biggest mistake. Hope, fear, and the districts that terrified Snow. Snow wanted volunteers who loved the games. Instead, he gets Katniss. So here's the real question. Once a tribute from the weakest district turns his own weapon against him, how does Snow stop that from ever happening again? This is where we talk about hope and fear as his real arena. You remember that conversation with Seneca Crane in the first film? Snow trims his roses and explains the whole system in 2 lines. Too much fear, people break. Too much hope, they rise up. The games aren't just punishment, they're calibration. Every arena, every victor, every rule change is Snow turning the dial between terror and possibility. At face value, the map of Panem looks simple. 12 districts, 1 capital, 1 set of rules. But there is a lot to uncover here. Districts 1 and 2 get more than food. They get the promise of status, training centers, career packs, mentors who actually expect to come home. Their children grow up believing the games are an opportunity. Terrifying, yes, but also a ladder. Hope carefully domesticated. Then you look at 11 and 12. Starvation, electric fences, peacekeepers who shoot a man for saluting a fallen tribute. Why keep some districts in near constant fear, while others are allowed to dream of victory parties and sponsors? Because Snow needs both ends of the spectrum. The careers prove the system works for someone. The poorest districts prove the capital can crush you whenever it wants. But here's the problem for him. Once you admit any hope into the system, you can't fully control where it spreads. A symbol slips, a story mutates, a victor refuses to play the part. That part matters because Snow doesn't actually hate the districts that fear him. He hates the districts that generate hope he didn't script. District 13 is the original sin in that equation. Officially, it's gone, erased in a single line, destroyed in the dark days. Unofficially, Snow knows the truth. 13 didn't just survive, it negotiated with the capital and built a life underground. Its very existence is uncontrolled hope, proof that you can lose everything the capital says you need and still endure. As long as 13 is out there, the relationship between capital and district is exposed as negotiable, not absolute. Decades later, District 12 becomes the sequel to that nightmare. On paper, it's perfect. Small, poor, compliant, producing coal, and exactly 0 threats. Then it produces Katniss and Peter, the victors whose nightlock stunt publicly humiliates Snow and turns one girl from the seam into the Mockingjay. Hope doesn't just appear in the rich districts anymore. It erupts from the last place the capital invested in. So when Snow firebombs 12 and tries to bury 13 a second time, he isn't just being cruel. He's trying to delete the evidence that his balance has failed. In the next sections, we're going to cover how each district fits into that scale, who plays their assigned role, who quietly resists, and who Snow singles out for extra suffering when their hope refuses to stay contained. Career districts, Snow's favorite children, and if some districts are evidence Snow wants to delete, that immediately raises a different question. Who does he actually reward? Because the balance only works if, while 12 and 13 are being ground down, somebody else is being lifted up and told, "See, the games can love you back." This is where we talk about the career districts. Districts 1, 2, and 4 are the capital's favorite children. At face value, they're just specialized regions: luxury goods, masonry and peacekeeping, fishing. But here's the real question: how do those industries accidentally turn into feeder systems for professional child gladiators? The answer is that Snow doesn't just tolerate that culture, he engineers his entire incentive structure around it. In these districts, you don't dread the reaping in the same way. You train for it. You grow up watching older kids in informal academies sparring with real weapons, while peacekeepers conveniently look the other way. Volunteering isn't a desperate act of love the way it is for Katniss. It's a graduation ceremony. You step forward, and your whole district cheers because a future victor means food, parties, and bragging rights. There is a lot to uncover here. Snow needs at least a few districts to see the games not just as punishment, but as a path to status. District 1 gets fashion and jewels paraded on screen. District 4 gets the glamorous career aura of Finnick Odair, the golden boy draped in nets and secrets. District 2 gets something even bigger, a direct pipeline into the capital's security forces. That part matters because it turns them from simple competitors into co-workers in the system. So why are these districts such a good fit for Snow's promise of a little hope? Because they're the proof of concept. When a kid in 6 or 10 watches the broadcast, they're supposed to think, if only we trained harder, if only we were more devoted, we could be them. The career districts become an aspirational mirror that always blames the victim and never the games. And in return, they get privileges, training centers that are unofficial but very real, peacekeepers who ignore illegal weapons because, well, those knives might win the capital a great show. A sense of superiority that says, we're not like those coal miners in 12 or those ghosts in 13. Why would you unite with districts you've been trained to look down on? Snow doesn't hate these places the way he hates 12 and 13. He uses them. District 2 especially becomes his military backbone, his stone fortress both literally and politically. When the rebellion finally spreads, notice where the capital makes its last stand. Not in 1, not in 4, in 2. Individual careers can still annoy him, sure, or fail him on camera, but as districts, they're never existential threats in his mind. They're buffers, tools, the sharp edge he points at everyone else. So what happens when one of the loser districts refuses that assigned role and starts producing victors anyway? N, the forgotten middle. Districts 5, 6, 9, and 10. So what happens when one of the loser districts refuses that assigned role and starts producing victors anyway? Before we get to that, we have to talk about the districts that almost never get a close-up. Districts 5, 6, 9, and 10. You know they exist. You see their tributes, and then they're gone. At face value, they feel like set dressing for the games rather than real political players. District 5 handles power. 6 does transportation. 9 is grain. 10 is livestock, essential to the capital's survival. But in the story, they're usually the kids who die in the bloodbath, while the camera's already panning to someone more important. There is a lot to uncover here, because that background status is exactly why Snow sleeps fine when he thinks about them. We're going to cover how Snow probably categorizes them in his head, not as friends, not as mortal enemies, as manageable, fragmented. None of them has a single, sharp, symbolic identity that can compete with the capital's narrative. District 11 is starving farm workers. 12 becomes the girl on fire. 13 is the ghost that didn't stay dead. What's the shorthand for 9? For 10, most viewers can't even name a single victor from them. And that part matters, because Snow's real fear isn't production capacity, it's meaning. He can always send more peacekeepers if a district slows down its grain quotas. What he can't easily crush is a story that spreads. District 5's fox-faced tribute is clever but anonymous. The morphling victors from 6 sacrifice themselves to save Peter, but in the capital's edit, they're tragic addicts, not martyrs. These places give him no headline he has to fight. Here's the real question. In a system built on humiliation, is being forgettable actually a kind of protection? Snow doesn't need to hate these districts, he just needs them to stay quiet, terrified, and interchangeable. As long as they don't produce a symbol, they're not a problem, they're statistics. Look at the contrast. District 11's Rue turns a child into a moral indictment of the games. Her death forces even the capital audience to feel something dangerous. District 12, with Katniss and Peter, weaponizes the promise of hope itself against Snow. District 13 exposes the original lie of the dark days by surviving. Those 3 become proof that the capital story is not the only story. But 5, 6, 9, 10, no uprisings on screen, no iconic songs, no Mockingjay broadcast starting there. Their very anonymity keeps them off Snow's personal hit list. He doesn't plot to erase them from the map, he just expects them to keep fueling the machine that erases them from memory. This is where we talk about Snow's hatred as something targeted, not evenly distributed. If his real obsession is with districts that refuse to stay forgettable, then we can narrow down who he truly wants destroyed. So which district finally crosses that line and pays the price for stepping out of the background? A. District 11 and the cost of open defiance. So, if Snow's real obsession is with districts that refuse to stay forgettable, District 11 should be at the top of the list, right? This is the place where the games stop being a show and start bleeding directly into the streets. You go back to Rue's death. Tiny, gentle Rue, who turns from a background tribute into an emotional center of the arena. Katniss covers her in flowers, the cameras linger, and for a second, the capital's clean narrative cracks. But here's the real question. Where does that crack actually explode? Not in the arena. In District 11. At face value, the 3-finger salute from the crowd is simple. A gesture of respect, some whistling, a quiet goodbye. But that part matters because it's the first time we see an entire district answer the games in unison, not with fear, but with solidarity. They're not supposed to identify with a foreign tribute. They do it anyway. And the peacekeepers panic. You remember the response. No speeches, no patient warnings, no careful PR. Batons, gunshots, people dragged away as Katniss watches on a giant screen. Horrified. The capital can edit the broadcast, but it can't unring that bell inside District 11. There is a lot to uncover here in how fast Snow's system moves from spectacle to siege. From that point on, 11 is treated as permanently unstable. We're going to cover the cost of that open defiance, because it isn't subtle. Harsh curfews lock workers in after dark. Food laws, already strict everywhere, become lethal here. Stealing a few ears of grain can mean execution. Public whippings are normalized, not just for smugglers, but for anyone who threatens the peacekeepers' control. And the constant military presence turns orchards and fields into something closer to an occupied war zone than a simple agricultural district. So why doesn't that make 11 Snow's ultimate nightmare? Why isn't he recentering the whole games around punishing them? The reason is brutally practical. Snow fears District 11's numbers and volatility, but he doesn't lie awake wondering what symbol they'll send him next. They don't have a single portable emblem that slips out of his control. No Mockingjay, no secret underground nation, just raw anger that he believes he can always crush with more guns. When 11 erupts again after Katniss's salute on the victory tour, Snow's response is instant and vicious. More peacekeepers, more whippings, more executions. But notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't redesign the entire system around 11. No special quell targeting their victors, no new rule that permanently rewrites the games just to break that one district. This is where we talk about refining our criteria. Snow's most hated district isn't just the one that riots the loudest. It's the one that forces him to change the rules of the game itself. District 11 pays in blood for every moment of open defiance, but it doesn't force a structural rewrite. So which district actually makes him rewrite the script? Not once, but multiple times. And what does that tell you about the relationship between personal hatred and political control? District 12, from afterthought to epicenter, the district that forces him to rewrite the script. That's the one he can't afford to ignore. This is where we talk about District 12. At face value, 12 is the last place you'd expect to become the epicenter of Snow's nightmares. It's the poorest district, the coal dust at the bottom of Panem's food chain. Almost no victors, no organized riots. Kids trading tesserae for a few extra grains so they don't starve before the reaping even happens. From the capital's perspective, it's barely a district. It's background scenery for the real show. And that part matters because neglect is its own kind of control. Early on, 12 doesn't get the heavy-duty peacekeeper presence you see in 11 or 2. Why waste resources? The capital's reasoning is simple. Starving people don't rebel. They just try to survive. So you get this strange, brutal freedom. You can sneak under the fence to hunt. You can trade in the hob. You can bend rules because no one in power thinks you're important enough to fully police. Does that sound safer or more terrifying? Here's the real question. What happens when the district no one's watching suddenly produces the one person everyone is watching? Enter the 74th Hunger Games. On paper, it's a routine year. No big political twist, no quarter-quell spectacle. Just another set of tributes fed into the arena. District 12 sends Katniss Everdeen and Peter Mellark, one volunteer, one star-crossed baker's son. The capital expects tragedy, maybe a surprise underdog story at best. What it gets is a direct hit to Snow's core strategy, fear wrapped in the promise of hope. The Nightlock berries are the turning point. 2 starving kids from the weakest district hold the entire game's hostage with a handful of poisonous fruit. They don't just survive, They threaten to break the broadcast, deny the capital its victor, and expose the games as something that can be negotiated. On live television, in front of every district. How do you walk that back? Snow caves. He lets them both win. Technically, it's a romantic miracle. Politically, it's a humiliation. The capital president, who never bends, suddenly has to change the rules mid-game because a girl from 12 would rather die than play by them. From that moment, 12 isn't coal country anymore. It's the place that manufactured his public embarrassment. So why does that shift matter so much? Because Snow's power depends on image. Once 12 produces the girl on fire, who makes him look weak, the relationship between Snow and this forgotten district flips. Every policy after that, tightening peacekeeper control, electrifying the fence, the specific wording of the quarter quell, isn't just about stability. It's personal. We're going to cover how that personal grudge escalates into something even worse. A twist designed to drag 12's victors back into the arena, and eventually the order to erase the district almost entirely. Katniss. The volunteer Snow never planned for. Snow's grudge is already simmering when District 12 does something he never planned for. It doesn't build a career tribute. It builds a girl who screams her sister's name. In the career districts, volunteering is practically a graduation ceremony. You train from childhood, you study past arenas, you treat the games as a brutal scholarship program. You stand up because you want glory, status, the mansion in Victor's village. At face value, that's exactly what Snow wanted. Ambition funneled into a single, controlled bloodbath every year. Then Prim's name is called. Katniss doesn't calculate odds, or think about sponsors, or picture herself as a victor. She just moves. That part matters, because the entire stadium and every screen in every district watches a girl volunteer for a reason Snow's design never accounted for. Love, not advancement. No training montage. No proud family nodding from the front row. Just panic and devotion, and a voice cracking as she bargains for her sister's life. Here's the real question. Why is that such a problem for Snow? On paper, a desperate, unpolished girl from 12 should be easier to kill than a career from 2. But the games aren't only about who survives. They're about what story survives. Snow's system is built to showcase selfishness and fear. Contributes clawing over each other for a slim promise of safety. Katniss flips that script in a single scene. Suddenly, the capital audience isn't just entertained, they're moved. The districts aren't just terrified, they're seeing themselves. You're not watching a fame-hungry career. You're watching the girl who would rather die than let her little sister go. There is a lot to uncover here, because that kind of self-sacrifice doesn't discourage rebellion. It suggests there's something more important than survival. This is where we talk about authenticity as a weapon Snow never meant to arm. Katniss doesn't play the Capital's game very well. She's stiff in interviews, blunt with Haymitch, openly disgusted by the excess. But that roughness reads as honesty. When she volunteers, when she honors Rue, when she holds those berries, her choices feel uncoached. The Capital can spin a career as bloodthirsty entertainment. How do you spin a girl who keeps accidentally revealing the system's cruelty? Snow tries to turn her into a pawn, the star-crossed lover, the grateful victor, the face of a tidy narrative where the games still work. But the relationship between Katniss and the audience keeps slipping out of his control. Districts read defiance into her smallest gestures. Even in the capital, people start asking the wrong question. Is she dangerous because she's violent, or because she's honest? And that's why his hatred of 12 spikes. Its tribute doesn't just win. She rewrites the emotional script of the games. She proves there's a courage his system can't contain, a hope he can't fully poison. So Snow does what he always does when subtlety fails. He sharpens the next arena. We're going to cover how the Quarter Quell becomes less a celebration and more a personal weapon, aimed straight at the girl who volunteered and the district that taught her to do it. The Nightlock incident, public humiliation on live TV. Snow sharpens the next arena. But before we get to the Quarter Quell, we have to talk about the moment that made it necessary. The one time the Hunger Games stopped being a script and turned into improv. Because the real question is, what happens when the arena forces Snow to blink first? This is where we talk about the Nightlock. You remember the climax of the 74th Games. At face value, it's a fairy tale twist. Midway through, Claudius Templesmith announces a new rule. 2 victors can win, as long as they're from the same district. Suddenly, Katniss and Peter aren't just enemies forced into a romance. They're a potential shared victory, a living promise to District 12 that the impossible can happen. Then, Cato dies. The cannon fires, the mutts go quiet, and the rule evaporates. The announcement is yanked back with that chilling line. The earlier revision has been revoked. 1 victor. The old order reasserts itself. Or it's supposed to. Here's the real question. Why is that reversal such a disaster for Snow personally? On paper, it's the capital reclaiming control. But in practice, 2 starving teenagers from the least important district in Panem call the capital's bluff. Katniss takes out the Nightlock berries, splits them, and turns a rigged execution into a hostage situation. On live TV, you either let both of us win, or you lose your victors entirely. There is a lot to uncover here. The games only work because everyone believes the rules are absolute, that the capital never negotiates with children. When Snow lets the double victor outcome stand, he doesn't just save Katniss and Peter. He publicly proves the rules can bend under pressure. That part matters because every district is watching that feed, seeing the same thing. The capital just folded. Symbolically, it's brutal. District 12, the coal pit that barely sends volunteers, has just outplayed centuries of fear conditioning. The relationship between power and obedience flips for a few seconds. Love and solidarity, however messy and manipulated, outmaneuver cruelty. If 2 kids can weaponize affection into a win, what could 12 districts do with coordinated defiance? Snow understands this instantly. The camera cuts away from the arena, but you know his mind is already moving. We're going to cover his long game in the Quarter Quell, but his short game starts the minute Katniss steps off that train. The roses, the cold, private conversation in her victor's village living room. The quiet threat, convince them it was all for the cameras or everyone you care about, burns. He can't undo the double victory, so he has to punish the symbol. This is the pivot where District 12 moves into direct competition with 13 for the title of District Snow hates most. 13 defied him in the shadows, through secret treaties and underground survival. 12 humiliates him in the spotlight. One proved he couldn't erase rebellion completely. The other proves he can be embarrassed. And humiliation, for Snow, is unforgivable. So how do you retaliate against a district that just turned your own games into a weapon? You redesign the next one to destroy the meaning of victory itself. Rigging the quarter quell, a personal vendetta disguised as tradition. So when Snow says, "Fine, you want to weaponize my games, I'll weaponize them back," he doesn't just send nastier mutts. He rewrites the calendar. On paper, the quarter quells sound almost poetic. Every 25 years, a special edition games, each with a unique twist, each twist supposedly written down at the very beginning of the Hunger Games and sealed away. At face value, it's tradition, a long-standing promise that the capital always had a plan for how to remind the districts of their defeat. We're told there were cards recorded decades earlier, locked in a box. Snow theatrically opens it on camera. The announcer reads out the rules in that solemn, ceremonial tone. It feels inevitable, ancient, untouchable. But here's the real question. Why does this particular card, out of all possible horrors, solve Snow's Katniss problem with surgical precision? The 75th quell twist is simple and devastating. The reaping pool will consist only of living victors from each district. No fresh 12-year-olds, no volunteers swooping in. Just the people who have already survived the arena once. And immediately, if you're from 12, your stomach drops, because you know the math. District 12 has 3 living victors: Haymitch, Katniss, Peter. That's it. No older woman to stand beside Katniss. No crowd of mentors to hide in. The rule says a female victor and a male victor, which means Katniss is going back. There is no drawing of lots in any meaningful sense. The entire female pool is one person. That part matters because it exposes how targeted this tradition really is. In theory, the quell is about all districts paying again. In practice, it hits 12 with almost maximum force. Districts with 10 or 12 victors can lose 2 and still have mentors, celebrities, symbols of survival. 12 loses 2 out of 3. You're not just sending tributes, you're gutting the only people who ever proved the games could be beaten. So is this just brutal efficiency or something more personal? There is a lot to uncover here. Snow needs Katniss dead, yes, but he also needs the story of Katniss erased. He can't be seen dragging her out of Victor's village and shooting her. That breaks the relationship between the capital and its own rules. So instead, he makes the rules remember her. This is where we talk about manipulation disguised as fate. The capital insists these quell conditions were written long before Katniss was born, but the coincidence is almost comedic in its precision. The one district that humiliated Snow on live television just happens to be the one with a single female victor, guaranteeing her return. The same district whose star-crossed lovers turned his games into a romance rebellion now has to send both halves of that symbol back into his arena. Snow isn't just maintaining order here, he's settling a score. He takes the promise of Victor's village, win once, and you're safe forever, and snaps it in half right where District 12 can see. It's revenge wrapped in parchment. And the cruelest part is, the quell isn't even the end game of that revenge. It's only the setup for what he plans to do to 12 next. Peacekeepers, whips, and whispers. Everyday punishment in 12. So when the quell twist is announced, you think the arena is where Snow's revenge will hit hardest. But the real punishment, that's waiting back home in District 12. To see how brutal the shift is, you have to remember what 12 was before the 74th Games. Corrupt, starving, forgotten, but weirdly loose around the edges. The peacekeepers took bribes. Cray spent more time drunk than enforcing anything. And the Hob functioned as this semi-tolerated black market. You could trade squirrel for soap, herbs for thread, and as long as no one made trouble, the capital looked away. Even poaching outside the fence was dangerous in theory, but in practice, the electricity was usually off, and everyone pretended not to notice Katniss and Gale slipping under. So why the change? Why does that shabby, overlooked coal district suddenly feel the full weight of the capital's boot after Katniss becomes a victor? At face value, you could say it's about general unrest, that Snow is cracking down everywhere. But here's the real question. If this was just standard policy, why does 12 transform so much faster and so much harsher than almost anywhere else? This is where we talk about the new peacekeepers. They don't drink with minors. They don't buy from greasy say. They arrive as a unit, armored in rules and cruelty, and immediately start rewriting daily life. No more hunting, no more hob, no more quiet deals in dark corners. The whipping post in the square stops being symbolic background dressing and becomes the main event, with Gale's public lashing as a message burned into everyone's memory. That part matters because it's not only about hurting Gale, it's about forcing Katniss to watch her best friend bleed for the crime of doing what she used to do every day. Then Snow escalates. The Hob isn't just raided, it's burned. You don't casually torch the one place a starving district uses to survive, unless you're sending a very specific message. We're going to cover open rebellion later, but notice what's happening here. There is no uprising in 12 yet. No bombs going off. No organized resistance. The crime is symbolic defiance, and the response is targeted economic strangulation. And it's targeted. Other districts suffer, absolutely. But we don't see this same sudden swap from lazy corruption to total militarization everywhere at once. 12 has become the Mockingjay's nest, and Snow wants that nest lined with barbed wire. The relationship between Katniss and her home is being weaponized. Every new restriction, every empty stall where the Hob used to be, is meant to whisper, "This is what her victory cost you." It's psychological warfare. The goal isn't only to control bodies, it's to rewrite stories. Katniss isn't supposed to be the hero who brought hope. She's supposed to be the reason your father got whipped, your trading post vanished, your fence is suddenly live. If Snow does this right, you don't dream of following her. You dream of never drawing the capital's eye at all. And that slow, grinding punishment, that's just the appetizer before Snow decides 12 doesn't deserve to exist. Fire from the sky, the annihilation of District 12. That appetizer line isn't metaphorical. Within hours of Katniss's escape from the Quarter Quell arena, Snow does something he's never done on page before. He erases a district in real time. District 12 isn't stormed, occupied, and slowly squeezed. It's firebombed. The seam, the town square, the hob, the school, the slag heap paths you can probably picture from Katniss's memories, gone in a single afternoon of hovercrafts and chemical fire. Fewer than 1,000 people make it out, mostly because Gale happens to be there, dragging families toward the woods as the sirens start. At face value, you could file this under standard capital brutality. Rebellion happens, capital retaliates. Cause, effect, ash. But here's the real question. What is 12 doing in that moment that justifies annihilation? It's not District 2 in open-armed conflict. It's not 8 already bombing factories. On the ground, there's no organized uprising yet, no military threat, no victors leading an assault. The crime is mostly symbolic. This is the district that produced the girl who beat the games twice and humiliated Snow with Nightlock. So why burn the coal district to the bedrock? This is where we talk about fear, not strategy. Snow isn't targeting a weapons depot. He's targeting a story. 12 has become the birthplace of the Mockingjay, the place where a starving hunter somehow outplayed the capital's entire spectacle. Destroying it is Snow's attempt to do to 12 what the capital claimed to do to 13, wipe it off the map so thoroughly that it becomes a cautionary tale, not an inspiration. The message is simple. Symbols don't get hometowns. That part matters because of who he's really talking to. On paper, this is collective punishment. In practice, it's a letter addressed directly to Katniss. You want to be the face of hope. You want to bend the rules of the games. Watch what happens to the people who shared your breadline. Their houses burn because you became a victor who wouldn't stay in her script. Snow is trying to rewrite the relationship between fame and safety. If you become a symbol, your district becomes kindling. And yet, there is a lot to uncover here in terms of unintended consequences. Victor's village survives almost untouched. A little row of pristine houses on a hill overlooking a graveyard. It's meant as psychological warfare, a staged ruin Katniss has to walk through later. Proof that the capital can take everything except the mansion they gave you as bait. But in preserving that suburb, Snow accidentally builds a museum of his own failure. Because 12 doesn't vanish. The survivors carry the story with them into 13. Suddenly, 12 isn't just poor, it's martyred. It joins 13 in that whispered category of districts the capital destroyed, and the comparison exposes the lie about 13's fate. In trying to erase the Mockingjay's roots, Snow deepens them. He turns one mining district into a legend. So where do you send a legend when her home is ash? Straight into the arms of the district he thought he'd buried decades ago. District 13 returns, the lie exposed. So when that legend steps off the hovercraft and you see the concrete bunkers, the grey uniforms, the command center screens of District 13, you're not just seeing a new setting. You're watching Snow's oldest lie walk on stage. Those first rebel broadcasts from 13 are brutal for the capital's narrative. At face value, they're simple propaganda, coin delivering tight, controlled messages. Katniss in the Mockingjay armor, staged in front of rubble or hospital beds. Quick cuts of soldiers, weapons, and underground farms. But here's the real question. Why do those grainy, hacked into capital TV images hit harder than any polished Caesar Flickerman interview ever could? Because they prove 13 exists, not as a ruin, as an organized, disciplined, fully functional district that has been planning for this moment since before Katniss was even born. The promise Snow has repeated for decades, that the capital crushed the original rebellion so completely that no one would dare try again, evaporates the second you see 13's missile bays. And War Room. Suddenly, that old mushroom cloud footage you grew up with, it starts to look edited. This is where we talk about the foundational bluff of Snow's power. His whole rise depends on a story. The capital can end you so thoroughly, you become a cautionary tale. District 13 was the Exhibit A. The reason the games exist. The reason every Victor tour passes that smoldering gap on the map. When 13 hijacks the airwaves, they're not just announcing, "We survived." They're saying, "Your president has been lying about the most important event in your history." That part matters because it doesn't just challenge his authority, it rewrites the origin myth of the entire system. So how does Snow react when the ghost he bragged about killing starts broadcasting in HD? He does what he always does when the games slip out of his control. He doubles down on image. We're going to cover the Peter angle more later, but you can already see the pattern. He floods the Capitol feed with carefully staged interviews. Peter in pristine clothes, pleading for a ceasefire, questioning 13's motives. If Coin is using Katniss as the Mockingjay, Snow turns Peter into the anti-Mockingjay. Why does he cling to Peter so hard? Because he can't erase the footage of 13, but he can try to poison the relationship between Katniss and the people sheltering her. If he can make her doubt 13 on screen, maybe he can convince the districts that this resurrected rebel capital is just another tyrant in waiting. And under all that strategy, there's something pettier, personal. 13's survival is the deepest insult to Snow's worldview. It proves that his favorite solution, total destruction, didn't work when it mattered most. His empire, his games, his threats are all balanced on a bluff he failed to cash in. So now we have a problem Snow can't spin away. One district he tried to erase and failed, and one he actually bombed into near oblivion. Which hatred runs deeper, the one that survived his bomb, or the one that forced him to drop it? Because the answer to that question is about to decide who he kills and who he needs alive. Book versus movie. Which district feels more hated? And this is where the medium starts picking sides for you. On the page, both 12 and 13 are slow-motion tragedies. You sit in that starvation with Katniss, counting every grain of food. You feel the sting of the whipping post in the square, the casual way a peacekeeper can end a life in a coal-dust street. In 13, you taste the blandness of the grey mush, live inside those schedules printed on your arm. Hear the unspoken threat behind violations. The books linger. They make you feel long-term, systemic cruelty as a daily climate, not a single storm. But then you watch the films. Suddenly, District 12 isn't just poor, it's ash. We get that bombing montage, the sirens, the firebombs raining down, the burning meadow, bodies in the street. The camera drags you through the ruins, through the skeleton of the hob, through the charred outline of someone who didn't make it to the woods. At face value, that's Snow's hatred made literal. He didn't just starve them, he erased them on screen. Meanwhile, 13 in the movies is all concrete corridors and sterile militarism. You get the bunkers, the fluorescent lights, the claustrophobic bunks stacked in rows. It feels strict, but it also feels controlled, competent, almost safe compared to the open-air massacre of 12. And here's the real question. If you're watching those images with no book context, which district feels like Snow's primary target? We're going to cover how the books quietly push back on that perception. In the text, 13's history never lets you forget its status as the original enemy. The old footage of the Capitol's destruction of 13, the revelation of the secret non-aggression deal, the way Plutarch and Coin discuss Snow as a political equal rather than a distant tyrant. That part matters because it keeps 13's role as the long-term threat in focus. Snow's entire presidency is built on the promise that 13 is gone. If it isn't, his whole narrative collapses. Compare that to Snow's broadcasts in the films. When he threatens Katniss after the berries, the framing is intimate. Roses, close-ups, veiled comments about your loved ones in District 12. His relationship to 12 is shot as personal vendetta. His relationship to 13, mostly as a strategic target to bomb when it starts airing propaganda. Pattern interrupt for a second. If you only counted explosions, you'd say 12 wins the most hated contest by a landslide. But the books keep reminding you that every games, every victor parade, every peacekeeper shipment is also aimed at the ghost of 13. So our perception of Snow's most hated district ends up being a storytelling artifact. The movies hand you the visceral horror of 12's destruction. The books hand you the political dossier explaining why 13 was the original nightmare. The canon supports a more nuanced answer. Snow needs 12 to suffer on camera, and he needs 13 to stay dead on paper. And the moment one of those needs fails, his whole system starts to crack. The next step is to watch how he scrambles to patch that crack by turning one district's pain into another district's weapon. Inside 13. The district that mirrors the capital. So when that crack opens, where does the pressure escape? Not into some random riot in 11 or 4. It funnels straight into the one place Snow has spent decades pretending doesn't exist. Underground, inside 13. On the surface, 13 looks heroic to you. The district that survived. The district that said no. But here's the real question. What does it look like from Snow's office, surrounded by roses and screens? It doesn't read as a scrappy rebel camp. It reads as a rival capital. This is where we talk about the daily reality under Coin. You wake up to a schedule tattooed on your skin, every minute assigned. Meals are ration bars in a concrete cafeteria. No color, no excess, no spontaneity. Work, drills, broadcasts, sleep. Repeat. At face value, it's the opposite of the capital's glitter and excess, but structurally, it's eerily familiar. A strict hierarchy, military ranks, surveillance, mandatory participation in the narrative. Coin's leadership style isn't some warm, communal resistance. It's central command. That part matters because Snow doesn't just see a rebellious district. He sees an institution that understands the same game he's playing. 13 doesn't just have weapons, it has discipline. It has a population trained to obey orders, to endure shortages, to follow a plan that might take years. And most dangerous of all, it has its own media machine. They aren't just filming Katniss for history. They're cutting propo, staging shots, scripting lines. They know propaganda. So why is that such a nightmare for Snow? Because his entire relationship with the districts is built on monopoly. He controls the games, the broadcasts, the symbols, the promise of hope. Suddenly, 13 is broadcasting a different story with the same tools. Roses used to frame the narrative. Now the mockingjay interrupts the feed. Look at the symbolic clash. Snow versus coin, roses versus mockingjay. Two authoritarian leaders, both convinced they should be the one writing Panem's story. Katniss becomes the shared resource they're fighting over. To Snow, she's the troublesome victor who must be contained. To Coin, she's the perfect mascot who must be pointed. Both script her, dress her, pose her, and then argue over whose version of her the districts will believe. And here's the real question. What does Snow actually hate more? The rebellion or the competition? He's not just angry that 13 survived the old war. He's furious that it survived as a mirror. 13 turns his own tools back on him. Political theater, controlled hope, weaponized media, and proves he's not unique. Compare that to 12. His hatred there is raw, emotional, rooted in humiliation and berries. With 13, the hatred is colder, almost professional, ideological, and strategic. He's watching another capital grow in the shadows, and he knows there isn't room for two. And once you have two competing storytellers, the next question is brutal. Whose ending does Panem believe? That's where Snow's fear stops being theoretical and starts dictating his most desperate moves. Weapons, starvation, and spectacle. How Snow customizes punishment. So once Snow realizes there are two storytellers, he reaches for the only thing he really trusts: force. But not just in the obvious way. This is where we talk about his whole toolkit: military power, economic strangling, and pure symbolic terror. Bombers and peacekeepers, rations and starvation, arenas and executions. On paper, it's all one system. At face value, every district gets the same treatment. They don't. Snow customizes the pain. In District 12, his favorite weapon isn't the hovercraft, it's hunger. You grow up there knowing the real lottery isn't the reaping, it's whether your family eats that night. Tesserae, coal quotas, the black market in the Hob, those aren't side details, they're the economic leash. Why send in an army when empty stomachs keep people too tired to rebel? That part matters because it explains why peacekeeper brutality in 12 can be so targeted. You don't need mass raids when one public whipping of Gale, one execution of a head peacekeeper reminds everyone who owns the air they breathe. And over all of that, you have the games. 12's children are currency and cautionary tale at the same time. Rue's death breaks you, but Katniss and Peter's victory breaks Snow. Their berries stunt turns 12 from a forgettable mining district into the birthplace of a symbol he can't fully control. A victor who refuses the script is a problem. A victor who becomes a promise of hope is a crisis. So why does he keep using the games anyway? Because in his mind, he can still rig them, twist the arena, and turn future tributes from 12 into warnings instead of martyrs. District 13 is a different problem. You can't starve what's already underground and rationing itself. You can't send peacekeepers where you officially won by annihilation. So Snow pivots. If 12 is managed through visible suffering, 13 is attacked through invisible pressure, propaganda, strategic lies, and psychological warfare. For decades, the capital broadcasts 13 as a smoking crater. Number survivors, no history, no relationship to the present. The message is simple. Step out of line and you don't just die, you get erased. Here's the real question. What's the difference between firebombing 12 and pretending 13 doesn't exist? Functionally, they're two sides of the same instinct. Erase the threat from the map and from memory. When Katniss escapes, Snow can't reassert control over 12, so he chooses annihilation. When he can't reach 13 at all, he chooses narrative annihilation instead. So which district does he hate more? The one he can't touch, or the one he finally decides isn't worth controlling, only burning? We're going to cover how that answer shows up in his most personal revenge plans next, and why one final choice of target tells you everything about the ending he's trying to write. The district that lived in Snow's head. So when Snow starts planning his most personal revenge, where does his mind actually live? On the underground bunkers of 13 or on the ashes of a coal town he already burned? Here's the real question. In the Mockingjay era, when everything is falling apart, which district is renting the most space in Snow's head on a day-to-day basis? If you map his mental landscape, it's split. 13 is the structural problem. A hidden military, stolen nukes, the original rebellion that forced the capital into that secret non-aggression deal. That part matters because it haunts his legitimacy. If 13 stands, the promise that the capital destroyed its enemies is exposed as a lie. So he worries about their missiles, their broadcasts, their command center. But when you track his actual choices, his emotional energy is orbiting something smaller, poorer, and supposedly irrelevant, District 12, or more specifically, the girl who walked out of its mines and into his games. This is where we talk about Katniss as a problem he can't spreadsheet away. At face value, she's just one victor from a throwaway district. But her defiance with the berries, her refusal to play the romance exactly on cue, her connection to Rue and Thresh and the other districts, those are the moments that turn 12 from background scenery into the origin point of a myth. The Mockingjay isn't born in 13's war room. It's born in an arena stunt from a starving coal town. So watch how often Snow's moves loop back to her home. The Quarter Quell twist. Officially, it's about reaping from existing victors. Functionally, it's a targeted strike on 12's two symbols, the girl on fire and the boy with the bread. Then, when that fails and she's lifted out by 13, his next major order is not nuke the bunkers, it's wipe 12 off the map. Why obliterate a district with no military power? Why not just tighten the peacekeepers, starve them, do the usual? because by then, 12 represents the one variable he cannot control: narrative. You can bomb 13 and they'll just retreat deeper, but you bomb 12 and you're trying to erase the origin story, the childhood streets, the people who remember Katniss before she was a symbol. And he doesn't just hit the district. He stalks through her relationships, hijacking Peter, threatening Prim, leveraging Gale's guilt from the mind bomb designs. Every move is aimed at the girl from 12, not the soldier from 13. There is a lot to uncover here, but the pattern is simple. When Snow wants to pressure the Mockingjay, he squeezes the coal. Pattern interrupt. If 13 is the real enemy, why is the only district he totally destroys the one that can't shoot back? That disproportionate retaliation is pure emotion. No other district gets that treatment. Even 8, even 11, brutal crackdowns. Yes, but not erasure. By the time the rebellion peaks, his structural enemy is 13. His visceral, everyday hatred is 12. And in the end, that obsession with erasing a story he can't control might be the thing that writes his own ending. Because the next step is to look at how that obsession shapes his final battlefield and why he chooses to turn the capital's children into the last message he ever sends. Abanon. What if Katniss had been from District 2? So if Snow's final message is the capital's children, here's the real question. What if the girl who forced him to send that message hadn't come from the district he wanted erased? Imagine Katniss not in a coal town on the edge of starvation, but in District 2. Stone, steel, training academies. A place where the games aren't a curse but a career path, where volunteering is a status move and the capital's promise of glory actually lands. How different does Snow's hatred look if his Mockingjay grows up in the capital's favorite guard dog district instead of its forgotten mine? At face value, you might think nothing changes. She still outsmarts the arena, still pulls the berries stunt, still becomes a victor the capital can't fully script. But this is where we talk about framing. A career district Katniss could be spun as hungry for advancement rather than hungry for bread. Her defiance becomes edgy ambition. Her skill becomes proof that the games work, that the system produces elite protectors for the capital. And that part matters because Snow's whole relationship with District 2 is structural. He needs its peacekeepers, its weaponry, its loyal victors who tour the districts and remind everyone why rebellion is a bad idea. He can't afford to annihilate 2 the way he firebombs 12 after the Quarter Quell. So if a Mockingjay rises from 2, his first move isn't to burn the district. It's to capture the narrative, discredit her personally, call her unstable, ungrateful, corrupted by outside influence. You can almost hear the propaganda. Here is a promising career tribute led astray by District 13, not proof that the games themselves are the problem. Snow would isolate the symbol from the district because 2 is too valuable to turn into rubble. But with Katniss from 12, he can't do that. There is a lot to uncover here. A starving girl from the least valued district refusing to play by the rules doesn't just embarrass him. She exposes the cruelty of the entire system in one shot. The capital lets her family starve, ignores her district's deaths in the mines, then expects her to smile on camera while children kill each other for food. When that girl says no, the lie of fairness collapses. That's the real reason District 12 becomes his obsession. He doesn't just see Katniss. He sees every seam kid, every tesserae slip, every half-empty table broadcast across Panem. If the Mockingjay had come from 2, he could argue she was an exception. From 12, she's evidence. So in Snow's mind, Katniss and District 12 fuse into one threat. You can't erase her without erasing it. You can't bomb it without trying to bomb her story. And when that fails, he escalates to the capital's children, turning his own city into the new arena. Which raises the next question. When the games finally come home, whose rules are actually being played and who's really sending the last message? A. Snow's grudge list, ranking the districts by threat. Once the games come home, you suddenly see something. Snow hasn't just been ruling a country. He's been nursing a grudge map. So here's the real question. If you could open Snow's private dossier and see a ranking of districts by how much they keep him up at night, what would that list actually look like? Not the propaganda version, the one built on fear, humiliation, and the constant need to prove the capital still owns the story. To build that ranking, we have to talk criteria. Military threat, obviously. Who has weapons, soldiers, infrastructure? But also symbolic power. Which district can turn one dead child into a national myth? Then there's history of rebellion, the places that already forced the capital to the negotiating table once. And finally, the most fragile metric of all, personal humiliation. Who made Snow swallow blood on live TV? At the very top structurally, it's District 13. On paper, they're gone. In reality, they're the one district that ever forced the capital into a deal. They had nuclear weapons, hardened bunkers, and enough leverage that Snow's predecessors agreed to pretend they were ash in exchange for peace. That part matters because it means the entire post-war order in Panem rests on a lie, and 13 is the proof. As long as they exist, Snow's promise of total control is a performance. So he hates them longest. They're the cold dread in the back of his mind, the reason every mention of rebellion carries a ghost of what if 13 comes back. And when they do return, they don't just fight. They lead. They seize the airwaves, take over the narrative, turn his games into propaganda against him. Structurally, they're his worst-case scenario. But emotionally, the district that lives rent-free in his nightmares is 12. District 12 is where the Mockingjay comes from, where a girl with a handful of berries turns his carefully staged double suicide into a love story he can't control. The Nightlock moment doesn't just threaten the games, it mocks him. At face value, it's 2 scared teenagers. On replay, it's a public referendum on whether Snow's threats still work. This is where we talk about personal retaliation. When the quarter quell explodes into open defiance and Katniss slips through his fingers, what does he choose to annihilate? Not 13. He can't. He firebombs 12 instead, erasing almost the entire population while leaving Victor's village standing as a twisted monument. That's not strategy. That's spite. Below them, District 11 sits in a special category. Volatile, but in his mind, containable. Highly emotional, quick to riot, but lacking the organized infrastructure of 13 or the unpredictable symbolism of 12. District 2 is different again. He fears its military capacity but relies on it as the capital's armored spine, a relationship that's closer to a dangerous marriage than open hatred. Districts 1 and 4, useful. They feed the game's careers, luxury, and spectacle. The mid-tier districts blur into background noise, exploited, brutalized, but not individually terrifying to Snow as long as they stay isolated. Put it together, and the pattern is clear. Snow's deepest, most enduring hatred is reserved for 13, the original sin he can never erase, but his sharpest, present-tense rage is aimed at 12, the coal dust that caught a spark. The real tension is what happens when those two hatreds finally meet. And the next move in that grudge map isn't made by Snow at all. The district that broke the games, and the next move in that grudge map isn't made by Snow at all. It's made by the games. Because here's the real question. What happens when the one system Snow trusts most, his elegant little murder pageant, starts siding with his least favorite district? At face value, the Hunger Games are his masterpiece. Annual terror, televised punishment, a twisted promise that if you suffer beautifully enough, you might come home a victor to a nicer house and full cupboards. The relationship is simple. The capital provides the spectacle, the districts provide the children, and fear does the rest. So why is it District 12, of all places, that keeps turning that system inside out? Start with the 74th Games. On paper, it's nothing special. A coal district girl, a baker's son, both statistically doomed. But this is where we talk about the Nightlock Bluff. Two tributes from the same district standing in a blood-soaked arena, calmly threatening to die together rather than give Snow his clean, single victor ending. That part matters because the games only work if the rules feel absolute. When Katniss and Peter force the two-victor outcome, they don't just survive, they publicly rewrite the rules on live television. And then the capital itself hands them the perfect cover story, a love story. The star-crossed lovers of District 12 become the excuse that saves Snow's face and, accidentally, the symbol that starts to crack it. We're going to cover how that romance is weaponized in the propaganda later, but the key point here is that 12 turns a scripted spectacle into a genuine threat. The arena stops being a cage and starts being a stage for rebellion. Snow tries to fix it with the Quarterquell, reap from existing victors, drag the problem tributes back, remind the districts that hope is conditional. But again, 12 breaks the games. The entire rebel plot is literally built around Katniss, the girl on fire using the arena's own wiring to blow it apart. The force field shatters, the sky goes dark, and the symbol of Snow's control becomes the opening shot of open war. Notice the pattern. Every major rule-bending moment that undermines his authority is tied to 12. The Nightlock Bluff, the forced two-victor outcome, the love story that refuses to stay fake, the arena's destruction. If you're Snow, that's not just disobedience, that's someone taking your favorite toy and snapping it in half in front of the whole country. So why bomb 12 off the map afterward? On one level, it's strategic retaliation. On another, it reads almost childish. If this district won't play the game properly, he'll take the board away entirely. No more Tesserae kids. No more cold tribute underdogs. No more accidental victors who turn his games into a liability. There is a lot to uncover here, because once you see 12 as the district that broke the games, you have to ask the next question: what do you rule with when your main weapon stops working? And the district that proved he could bleed. You lose your main weapon, fear through the games. So what's left? For Snow, the answer keeps circling back to one problem district. Not 2 with its peacekeepers, not even 13 with its nukes. The place that really exposes him is the one that was never supposed to matter: 12. Because 12 isn't just the district that broke the games. It's the district that proves Snow can bleed. Think about the first time most of Panem really noticed 12. 2 kids in second-hand clothes stepping out of that chariot, and suddenly they're on fire. At face value, the flaming entrance is just Sinner doing fashion. But here's the real question: why does that moment land so hard? It takes the coal joke the capital's been making for decades and flips it. The weakest district becomes the visual center of the parade, and Snow can't stop it without admitting he's afraid of a costume. Then we get Rue's funeral, Katniss decorating a dead tribute with flowers, saluting District 11, and the crowd answering with that 3-finger gesture. That part matters because it's the first time the relationship between district and tribute breaks script on live television. You're watching grief turn into defiance in real time. Snow has to send peacekeepers and executions to 11 afterward, which means he's reacting to a girl from 12, not directing the narrative, chasing it. And of course, the berries. 2 tributes from 12, refusing to kill each other, forcing the capital to either lose its victors or its rules. Snow chooses the rules. The Nightlock incident doesn't just humiliate him, it advertises to every district that the games can be outmaneuvered by a pair of starving teenagers. If they can corner the system, what else is possible? Where else has he been bluffing? We're going to cover the firebombing in more detail later, but this is where we talk about the reveal itself. In Catching Fire, when the remaining districts learn that 12 has been wiped out except for Victor's village, the message is supposed to be, obey or this is you. The problem is the subtext. If Snow were a god, he wouldn't need to annihilate a coal town over one girl with a bow. The overkill exposes his insecurity. So why does he hate 12 so much? Because hatred is safer to admit than fear. 12 keeps reminding him he's not omnipotent. Every public crack in his image has a 12 stamped on it. The girl on fire, the salute for Rue, the star-crossed lovers, the bombed district that still produces a mockingjay. Even after its destruction, 12 won't stay buried. Its survivors become the core cast of his downfall. Katniss as the symbol, Peter as the hijacked mouthpiece who won't quite break. Haymitch as the veteran victor who understands the games too well. They carry 12 with them into every interview, every propo, every whispered rumor in the districts. And that's the real damage. Militarily, 12 is nothing. Psychologically, it's catastrophic. It turns Snow from untouchable tyrant into a man who can be cornered, forced into messy, visible violence. The districts don't just see a ruler anymore, they see a wound. Once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. Which raises the next question: if 12 proves Snow can bleed, who first taught him he could die? So, which district did Snow hate the most? So if District 12 proves Snow can bleed, Who first taught him he could die? That's where District 13 walks in, or technically vanishes. On paper, 13 is gone before the trilogy even starts, wiped out in the dark days. But here's the real question. If it was truly erased, why does Snow still rule as if it's watching him? At face value, 13 is just a cautionary tale. The district the capital destroyed to prove a point. But there is a lot to uncover here. 13 didn't just rebel. It negotiated. It forced the capital into a secret agreement that let it survive underground, trading its nuclear arsenal for a Cold War stalemate. That part matters because Snow inherits a regime built on a lie. The promise that the capital can annihilate you, even though there's one district it couldn't finish. So, when we're talking about long-term, regime-defining hatred, 13 is the answer. Snow's entire political identity is built around denying that district's existence. Every games, every public execution, every white rose is a performance meant to cover that original failure. The relationship between Snow and 13 is structural. It's the ghost in every broadcast. He doesn't just hate them for rebelling. He hates that their survival proves the capital can be bargained with. But this is where we talk about the period you actually see on the page and on screen. Because by the time Katniss steps into the arena, 13 isn't the district Snow is actively trying to break. It's the one he's trying to pretend doesn't exist. The place that claws its way back into relevance by turning a girl from a coal seam into a mockingjay. So who absorbs the heat of his present tense rage? That's District 12. The poorest, least strategic district becomes his most urgent emotional problem. Why? Because 12 humiliates him. The 74th Hunger Games end with 2 victors from 12 threatening joint suicide with nightlock berries on live television in front of the entire nation. Snow's whole system depends on the games being terrifying but controlled. Katniss and Peter turn them into a story of hope and romantic defiance he can't immediately crush without exposing his own weakness. From that moment on, Snow's moves keep circling back to 12. The rigged quarter quell that throws its victors back in, the peacekeeper crackdowns, and finally the firebombing that kills almost everyone, sparing only Victor's village, as a kind of burned-in signature. Militarily, it's pointless. Symbolically, it's him trying to erase the district that made him bleed on camera. So the synthesized answer is messy but honest. Snow's regime hates 13 the most. Snow the man, in the years we witness, hates 12 the most. One is the enemy that warped his entire rule. The other is the one that publicly shatters it. And that leaves you with an uncomfortable question. When a dictator finally falls, which enemy really brought him down? The one he spent decades planning for, or the one he never took seriously until it was too late? What Snow's hatred tells us about power. So what does it actually mean that the man who firebombed 13 on paper spent his final years obsessing over 12? Because that's not just a petty grudge. That's a roadmap of how power thinks. At face value, you'd assume Snow fears tanks, nukes, trained peacekeepers, District 2's stone, and soldiers. District 13's missiles. But here's the real question. Why does he keep circling back to a coal district with no real army, no infrastructure, and a history of being ignored? The reason is baked into the franchise's core thesis. Oppressive systems don't just fear strength. They fear symbols, stories, songs. A girl with a Mockingjay pin who makes you wonder if the games are beatable. This is where we talk about District 12's journey. Back then, it's the punchline of Panem, the seam, starvation, the district that almost never produces a victor. So why bother? Because when you underestimate the margins for long enough, they're the only place something truly new can grow. 12 goes from statistical afterthought to the home of the girl on fire, the boy with the bread, and a victory that forces the capital to literally rewrite the rules mid-games. That part matters because it shows you how power structures miscalculate. They pour punishment on the loud threats and neglect the quiet embarrassments. By the time Snow realizes 12 isn't just weak, but narratively dangerous, it's too late. Every child in every district has watched a starving coal miner's daughter outwit the arena and the capital's script at the same time. And hovering under all of this is 13. The district that proves brute force has limits. You can destroy a district, erase it from maps, build your entire mythos on its ashes. So why does its idea keep leaking back in rumors and forbidden footage? Because 13's survival story is the nightmare of every regime. The proof that even when you win militarily, resistance can go underground and keep evolving. Here's the pattern interrupt. Snow tries to crush both 12 and 13 for different reasons, but he ends up welding them together. The symbol and the bunker, the song and the missiles. We're going to cover how that alliance functions later, but the important thing here is the relationship between hope and fear. Snow thinks he can micromanage both, give districts a tiny promise of victory while dangling annihilation. Instead, he mismanages them so badly that hope and fear stop cancelling each other out and start amplifying. By firebombing 12 after the quarter quell, he doesn't just punish Katniss. He writes a story. The capital will exterminate you for believing in a different ending. And once that story spreads, the map of Panem stops being geography and turns into a study guide for real-world power. Who gets rewards? Who gets routine cruelty? Who gets singled out for special hatred because they made the ruler look foolish on camera? So when you look at Panem now, you're not just seeing districts, you're seeing how regimes in our world distribute punishment and favor, and how the places they try hardest to erase often become the ones history remembers. And if that's true, then the next question is brutal. After Snow falls, does the new leadership actually break that pattern or just redraw the map? Your turn, 12, 13, or someone else. So when a new regime redraws the map, here's the real question. If you were sitting in Snow's rose garden, looking out at that same map, which district would you quietly circle in red? Which one do you think he truly hated the most? You've heard my read on his patterns. Now I want yours, because at face value, District 13 feels like the obvious answer, right? The destroyed district that wasn't actually destroyed, the one that cut a secret deal with the capital and then spent decades underground, waiting for its moment. If you're Snow, how do you sleep knowing an entire district you supposedly erased is still out there, armed and filming propaganda? But then you have 12, the poor coal district that should have stayed invisible and instead produced Katniss and Peter, the victors whose Nightlock stunt turned the games into a referendum on Snow's authority. That part matters because his response isn't subtle. He firebombs District 12 off the map after the quarter quell, sparing only Victor's village. It's not just punishment, it's personal. So is 12 the district he fears or the district he hates? And we haven't even talked about 11 and 2. District 11 gives us Rue, whose death sparks a riot mid-games, right under the capital's cameras. Later, the people of 11 salute Katniss, and that quiet gesture turns into open rebellion. If you're tracking the relationship between symbolism and control, that's a nightmare for Snow. Meanwhile, District 2 is his blunt instrument and his liability. It supplies peacekeepers, careers, the nut. But when 2 turns, the capital's whole military backbone fractures. Does Snow resent 2 for needing it so much? So here's what I want you to do. In the comments, rank Snow's top 3 most hated districts. 1, 2, 3. Then give me one scene or quote from the books or movies that proves your case. Maybe it's the bombing of 12. Maybe it's Coin revealing 13's deal. Maybe it's the riot in 11 after Rue, or the siege of the Nut in 2. There is a lot to uncover here, and I want to see how you're reading the same evidence. This is where we talk about future videos too. If a ton of you put 11 in your top slot, that tells me we need a deep dive into District 11's rebellions and what Snow was really afraid of there. If 2 keeps showing up, we're going to cover its complicated role as both capital favorite and eventual traitor. Think of the comments as our own Victor's village, a little separated from the rest of the internet, full of people who have survived way too many Hunger Games trivia nights, arguing in way too much detail about Panem lore. Drop your ranking, defend it, and then in the next section we'll turn all of this back on Snow one last time and ask what his hate actually cost him. Air. Leaving the arena. Subscribe before the next quell. So we've spent this whole video treating Snow's hatred like a map. Now we can finally step back and see the whole thing. We started with that early fear of District 13, the district that was supposed to be gone, erased, a cautionary tale. On paper, 13 was the nightmare. Nukes, rebellion routes, a secret deal with the capital. But here's the real question. If 13 was the ghost that haunted Snow's past, why did 12 become the district he burned in the present? You watched the games evolve with him. Back then, it was crude punishment, public executions with better lighting. Over time, the arenas got smarter, the victor's village got shinier, the promise got clearer. Suffer enough, perform well enough, and your district might get a victor, a little food, a little hope. At face value, that's generosity. In practice, it's a leash. And then District 12 snapped it. A coal district with no careers, no prestige, barely any victors on the board. Out of that dust you get Katniss and Peter, the pair who turn a rigged love story into a public hostage situation with nightlock berries. That part matters because it isn't just defiance, it's humiliation broadcast to every district and every capital living room. From there, we're going to cover the fallout in Fast Forward. The 75th games twisted into a quarter quell that drags existing victors back in. The arena turned into a spark for open rebellion. And when Snow needs to make an example, he doesn't bomb 2, the military backbone. He doesn't bomb 4, the glamorous sponsor favorite. He firebombs 12. He tries to wipe the symbol off the map and leaves only Victor's village standing as a kind of scorched signature. So what's the takeaway when you zoom out? Power doesn't punish evenly. It fixates. It obsesses. It builds whole games around breaking one relationship between one district and one girl with a bow. Sometimes it will burn an entire place just to silence a story that makes its citizens ask the wrong question. If you're still here at the end, you're not just watching Hunger Games clips on autoplay. You're basically living in the Victor's village of this channel, a little apart from the main feed, arguing over why Snow hated who he hated. If you want more of this deep Victor's village level analysis, hit subscribe and stay in the rebellion with us. Not done with Panem yet? Next, watch the breakdown on District 2's loyalty and ask whether the capital's favorite guard dog ever had a choice. Or dive into how the Cortiquels were really chosen and what those cards in the box were hiding from the start. Because in Panem, no district is truly safe, but the ones the capital hates the most. Those are usually the ones changing the story.